I'm Marge Battle. Welcome to this week's edition of Education and Perspectives from Medgar Evers College of the City University of New York. I know you'll find today's program inspiring and exciting, so stay with us for Education and Perspectives.
I now call upon the Reverend Ivan Pitts to offer words of meditation. Reverend Pitts. Journey with me, if you will. Let us close our eyes. Let us open our hands. Let's uncross our legs. Let's just relax for one moment, please. Think about your major, whether it's psychology, teaching, nursing, computer science. Think now, 10 years down the line, you're in your job. You're that great teacher. You're that great psychologist. You're that nurse. You're that doctor. You're that lawyer. Think about it. Can you picture yourself? Think about it. You have your shirt and your tie on. You're standing in front of your colleagues. Think about it. Can you see it in your mind? You're successful. You're brilliant. You're smart. Now come back to today. How did you get there? What obstacles did you overcome? Think about it. You started this journey as a freshman. You were concerned about whether you were smart enough to make it through Medgar Evers College. You were concerned if you had the money to pay for your books, babysitting. You were concerned because your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your mother, your father said, you don't need to come to college. Can you see it? And then you came to class and you had problems. Math problems that you couldn't figure out, and you had to write papers that you didn't know how to write, and you thought it was going to be too tough for you. Think about it. Can you imagine that? You can see it. Students come to the office daily saying that this is too hard, but somehow you get past it. Somehow you overcome that barrier. Somehow you make it through your first year. Somehow you graduate. Can you see it? Look it in your mind. Look. Can you see it in your mind? You have on your robe. Some of us are going to teacher credential programs. Some of us are going to graduate school. But can you see yourself? If you can see it, now you're going to start to believe it. Believe it. If you can see it in your mind and begin to believe it in your heart, then surely, you can achieve it. Amen? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in the name of Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh, the great creator, and whoever else is out there, amen. It is now my pleasure to introduce a great colleague, a great faculty member who has now been promoted to the position of Executive Director of the Office of Student Life, Mr. Jeffrey Siegler, who has the distinguished and distinct pleasure of introducing our distinguished lecturer for today, Mr. Jeffrey Siegler.
Good afternoon, Medgar Evers College family, dearest guests, invited guests from the community. As Dr. Jackson said, it is indeed my personal pleasure to be able to introduce this afternoon's featured speaker of the Presidential Lecture Series. Someone once told me, instead of asking Jeff, why not me, ask, why not me? And so I think I was brought up here for a purpose. And as I shared with Reverend Sharpton, I think I know what that purpose was. The same doctor that brought Reverend Al Sharpton into this world, the late, great Aurelius King, guess what? That same doctor brought Jeff Sigler into this world. So that's our connection. That's our connection. And the reason why I knew that is because my mother was a secretary for this doctor. And she realized at the time when Reverend Sharpton was making his ascent in his public display, that she said, you know what, Jeff? You see that man on TV? He was the same little boy that used to come in there with his mother to Dr. King's office. But she said, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, Reverend Al Sharpton is necessary in our community. And because I love my mother so, those words stuck. So let me make sure we understand what is the definition of necessary. If you look in any thesaurus, necessary, it's important, badly needed, a requisite, urgent, vital. And for most of you in here, you are freshman seminar 101 and 102 students, and you are taught how to think critically. And our guest speaker, I'm glad he's here today because it's probably the first time that many of you have heard this man in full context. You see, because it's very easy to find out who has heard this man speak and who hasn't. If you engage in dialogue with people, they end up sounding like somebody from Channel 7, Channel 4, Channel 2, CNN, because they can only repeat what they've heard from a 30-second soundbite. But they have never come to the Brooklyn Masonic Temple on a Tuesday evening or the National Action Network in Harlem on a Saturday morning and seen a man come to the podium and all he has to say is, if they say get back, we say fight back. Or he may come up to the podium and he'll just have to say, no justice, and the whole room says, no peace. You see, those people don't get to hear that on the news, nor did they know that our featured speaker, as the great Adlai Sanford, a regent of New York State, would often say, he didn't start being a revolutionary late in the process. This is a person who preached his first sermon at the age of 4. He's an ordained minister at the age of 12. He led student movements. He didn't wait for anybody to say, Al Sharpton, you shall be anointed. He led those movements at the age that some of you are right now and way before. So because of the hour, I won't take up too much of that time because I would like for you to hear this man who follows in the footsteps of the 3 M's, Martin, Malcolm, and Medgar. And let us not be fooled because history tells us a different story. I'm sure Dr. King was criticized as a busybody, a big mouth, a troublemaker. Why is he making trouble for us? I'm sure Malcolm was once anointed those same things. And I definitely know Medgar received flack from his own community about what he was trying to do. But some 30-odd years later, you have a holiday for Dr. King. Malcolm X, I don't know what he thinks about it, but he's even on a stamp. And Medgar Wally Evers has a fabulous institution named in his honor. So we need to listen to our great speakers, whether we agree with them or not, because like Dr. Jackson says, we can agree to disagree. But you as critical thinkers, it is your obligation to assess what someone brings to you and judge it for yourself. Don't go on the words of other folks. Reverend Sharpton is a man who speaks from his convictions, and he is led by those convictions. And he is not, even with a stab wound in 1991, deterred from what he is here to do on this earth. So without further ado, I bring you the author of his own autobiography, Go and Tell Pharaoh, the president and founder of the National Action Network, husband, father, the great Reverend Al Sharpton.
Thank you very much to President Jackson and to all of the dais guests and to the faculties and members and students. Certainly I'm honored and happy to be here this afternoon at Medgar Evers College. First, I want to say to Mr. Siegler, it is true that Dr. A. King was the doctor that brought me in the world right at Kings County Hospital. 2 minutes after I was born, he slapped me on the behind, and I've been screaming ever since. I'm very honored to be here also as we remember in this series Dr. Betty Shabazz. Dr. Betty Shabazz was not only a great academician and part of this college, she was part of my life. She was the godmother of my 2 daughters. And every time I think about this college, I think about her. She spent many hours trying to help guide many of us that grew up in the struggle under her. And we greatly miss her. She had a perfect balance of intellect and activism. And when I say that, I don't use either words lightly because many people call themselves intellectuals that really are not, and many call themselves activists that really are not. If you are really an intellectual or you pursue to be one, you are not frightened by what you are not familiar with. In fact, you become intrigued by it. And if you're really an activist, you don't just run your mouth. You get involved actively in trying to pursue and make real that you believe in. We live in a time where people are too easily allowed to describe themselves and never live up to what they describe. So we get caught up more on style than on real productive action. And those that act the baddest seem to be the ones that we tend to feel are the most active. But when we check the record, we find there's a huge gap between their actions and their rhetoric. Dr. Shabazz never had that gap. Today we meet within 90 days of the new millennium, according to the calendar of this country. And I say that because all calendars is not the new millennium, which is really my point. The new millennium in today's hype is being sold with such fervor to many of us feel like there will be a whole new world once the clock strikes 12 on December 31st. I want to, at the outset, tell you that nothing magic will happen on December 31st at midnight. In fact, the new millennium will be much like the old millennium unless we get up and do something about the new millennium if we intend to see change. When the clock strikes 12, freedom will not come out of the vents at your house. Justice will not rain down from the clouds. Empowerment will not just automatically happen. It will be a big party, and then you'll go back to business as usual unless you have a new commitment for the new millennium. So many of us that have pinned our hopes on the new millennium need to understand that a lot of it is commercial hype, where people intend to make big money off New Year's Eve, your money and my money, and they will have a new vacation while you go back into the same old environment unless we are committed to some change. Let me say also at the outset, as I talk to you today and then we engage in dialogue, I am one of the few public figures in this country that does not get caught up on people's opinions about me. I say what I believe. If you like me or dislike me when we get finished, I promise you I'll sleep good tonight. And I hope you'll do the same thing. Because I think we have too many people in public life that are more concerned with being liked than with being right, or at least being right as to what they believe is right and standing by that and saying what they think people want to hear rather than what people need to hear. And if we become more honest with ourselves, it will, in my judgment, make a better community and a better nation, rather than people taking a poll and going by the results of the poll rather than going by what they know to be right. If we as a community, if we in the African American and African Caribbean and African communities and Latino communities and other communities had only been guided by those who wanted to be popular, we would not be sitting in this building today. The first argument I want to raise today is that as we come to the close of the 20th century, we must first analyze that all that was achieved through struggle. And if we are going forward from here, we can only do that if we all engage somehow, some way in that struggle. We in this generation take far too much for granted and act as if things that you have that your grandparents didn't have happened by automatic rather than happen by struggle. When the brother was introducing me and talking about King and others, we must first understand that in any struggle, there will always be tension. And there will always be those that are out front of struggles that will suffer as the targets of the tension. But without that tension and without that struggle, progress cannot be made. Let's quickly review where we are talking about. We are now in the bottom part of this year, bottom part of this century. When we entered this century 100 years ago, blacks couldn't vote, blacks couldn't go to school. We were about 15 years from being legally bound from not being able to read and write. I'm not talking about a custom by law. It was against the law for blacks to read and write. It was against the law for us to marry and name our children after us. We couldn't ride in transit that others could ride. We couldn't check in hotels. We couldn't eat in restaurants. We could not enjoy basic human dignity in these United States. At the end of this century, we see a far different picture. It is easy now to act as if those things don't matter, but they meant a whole lot to people that had to struggle to gain them in the first place. I meet a lot of young people in campuses that say, well, to me, that means nothing. Yet they enjoy the life that was won. I don't meet any of them that say the civil rights movement meant nothing and then they go sit in the back of the bus or don't check in a hotel or don't attend campus. They all enjoy the stuff they criticize rather than say that was a stage we had to achieve so that we could get to the stage you should achieve. There's nothing, in my judgment, heroic about condemning those that laid a path for you and use your criticism of them to duck the obligation you have to continue to walk that path. So when we look at all of that, it was achieved through very difficult struggle and sacrifice. Now today we look at these people as names, whatever looking behind the name at the sacrifice. Medgar Evers, school you attend named after him, was a young man with 3 children, died in his 30s for the fight that he led in Mississippi to gain us the right to vote. Forget the name. Think of the human story. Young man in his 30s, raising adolescent children, married to a young wife, who dared take the risk of trying to fight in the middle of the southern apartheid state of Mississippi to gain us the right to vote. Man waited in the bushes one night and blew his brains out. He never saw any of his children become adults, never knew if they went to college, never knew if they married, laid down and died in his own pool of blood. And it took decades to even convict his killer. And his movement won because we gained the right to vote. Yet 30 years later, those he died on behalf of, we have to beg them to go and exercise a right that he had to pay with his life. And even what's worse is some that are in high position as a result of his fighting turn their backs on those that fought for them and gain positions like this was inherited rather than fought for. And then when those that come along and engage in the same struggle, they have the nerve to call us troublemakers when it was troublemakers that gained them the right in the first place. Martin Luther King, Sigler said, has a national holiday. That's true, but it didn't start out that way. Martin Luther King had a PhD from Boston University. His father was one of the most renowned ministers in Atlanta, Georgia. He didn't have to fight. He could have been the president of a major black college. He could have pastored any major church he wanted. Dr. King chose to stand up for a black woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who decided that she didn't have to sit in the back of the bus. Now, mind you, Rosa Parks wasn't the only one they made sit in the back. There were many people that were more intellectual, more trained. There were men far more muscular and physically fit. All of them went and took a seat in the back. In fact, they justified it as we justify it today. We have a tremendous capacity of justifying adjusting to injustice. They would sit in the back saying, the back going where the front's going. If the bus get in an accident, the folk in the front die first. All of that to cover up their cowardice and to cover up the fact that they were afraid to stand up for what was right. And it wasn't about integration, it was about desegregation. Wasn't that people fought for the right to sit next to whites? It was about if we pay the same fare, we should have the same options. But this little frail lady, barely 100 pounds, sat down in the front of the bus. Martin Luther King emerged as the leader of that movement. Don't get confused with the holiday. They came after Dr. King with everything they could. They indicted him for income tax evasion, stabbed him, jailed him over 20 times. The head of law enforcement in this country, J. Edgar Hoover, publicly said that Dr. King was the most notorious liar in the country. It is easy today to see people talk about Dr. King in such glowing terms, but most of those testimonials Dr. King never heard. He died with whites calling him a communist because he opposed the war in Vietnam, and with some of us calling him an Uncle Tom because he believed in nonviolence and passive resistance, and died never knowing all the great things that would be said about him. In fact, one of the great ironies of history is that I see now people keynoting the Martin Luther King memorials who fought Martin Luther King when he was here. And those of us that followed him have to sit and listen to them reminisce about a dream that they tried to stop and a dreamer that they denounced. Even the holiday took a struggle. Don't ever think that they woke up one morning in Washington and said, let's have a holiday for Dr. King. We had to march, we had to petition, we had to go state by state. It was a struggle just to get the King holiday on the books. Everything came as a result of struggle. Malcolm, on a U.S. stamp now, but Malcolm was considered the hate teacher, the hate minister, not only by whites but blacks. Many blacks would see Malcolm walking down the street and would cross the street and denounce him until he died. There's a peculiar vulture psychology with some of us. We love dead leaders. We hang around graveyards, crying and slobbering after they're gone. But as long as they're alive, we find reasons not to support them. And the reason I believe that, President Jackson, is because it's easy to follow dead men. Because dead men can't assign you to nothing. Dead men can't call on you to do anything. So when they're safely gone, it's easy to name things after them. It's easy to hang their pictures up. It's more difficult to struggle with people while they may hold you accountable. But I'm not only talking about individuals, I'm talking about generations. The generations that preceded us are all defined for their contribution to the empowerment of our community. Our grandparents was the generation of Dr. King and Malcolm and Thurgood Marshall. And it was that generation that produced and delivered the Civil Rights Act, the Voter Rights Act, and other tangible things that broke down parts of American apartheid. I remember in 1995, 4 years ago this past Saturday, we had the Million Man March in Washington. I spoke at that march, and when I came off the stage, I remember a brother said to me, "Remal, this was a great day." I said, "Yes, it's a great day." He said, "We beat them." I said, "We beat who?" He said, "We beat the March of '63. I said, "Well, why do you say that?" He said, "Because in '63, Dr. King spoke about I Have a Dream. They only had 250,000. And today we have over 1 million. I said, "Well, brother, it's true. We have more people today than they had in '63, but we didn't beat them. Because you must understand the continuity of history. Fact of the matter is, in '63, they came to Washington on the back of buses. Some of them had to have greasy paper bags with fried chicken sandwiches because there wasn't a restaurant that would sell them a meal. Many had to sleep in the back of their cars because motels wouldn't rent them a room. Many of them had to drive for miles holding their body because they couldn't use a public toilet. But they came anyhow. And because they came in '63, we could come back first class in '95. Don't compete with those that sponsored you. Continue their struggle. But to spit on the graves of your grandfathers is to make you ungrateful and to also cut the chain of continuity that you should be realizing and continuing. Even this school comes out of a struggle of a generation that fought to give those of us that couldn't afford Harvard and couldn't afford Yale and wasn't in the budget for the other highfalutin institutions, the right to have a public college education. And people in New York City fought and went to jail so you would have institutions like this. So you should not walk through these doors with frivolity on your mind. You should not come to class trying to cut corners and try to get away with as little as you can. You should not take up space if you're not serious about developing your mind to help develop your community. If you want to meet a girl, go to the club and meet her. If you want to hang out, go to a social place and hang out. But the price was too high, the suffering too deep. People's too many lives disrupted so you would have a place like this. Therefore, you should not misuse it if you're not serious about it. Well, Remal, that was then, this is now. Well, let's talk about now. Whole city all caught up on this or that. One of the games they play is a game of distraction. Some of y'all know there's a game they play in Times Square called 5-Card Molly. 3-Card Molly. See, I knew you knew it. I was just testing. District Leader Boone corrected me right away. Y'all better check out where he is on the weekend. And the way they beat you in 3-Card Molly is they distract you. They make you guess what the card has, the object under it, by distracting you. And that's how they play the game today. They distract us to where we are following the wrong issues, so we don't deal with the substantive issues. So the distraction this week is the Klan is coming. So everybody's caught up on what should we do about the Klan. And with all the hype, there'll be 20, 25 guys in hoods stand in front of the courthouse next Saturday. That is not our problem. The problem ain't the Klan with the hood. The problem is the Klan without the hood. We're living in a city where we've seen the systemic elimination of blacks and Latinos under city employment. Study done recently by the Village Voice, the whitenizing of municipal employees. We're living in a city in a surplus economy where public education programs are being cut, where health care is being cut. We're living in a city where a policeman would take a young man not to a wooded area, but to a precinct and stick a plunger in his rectum. We living in a city where an unarmed man going in his own house with no arms and no crime, with no 911 call, would be shot at 41 times. 19 bullets pierce his body. And somebody gonna ask me about the Klan coming. The Klan is already here. But if you are distracted, you will feel when their march is over Saturday that they've left town and there's nothing for you to do. Now, that does not mean that everybody in town is in the Klan. That does not mean that I'm saying that all people are bad or all police are bad. But I'm saying that there's a challenge on your generation, just like every generation ahead of you. And every generation's students fought those challenges. Fact of the matter is, it was Student Nonviolent Committee in their 20s that were the troops of the Civil Rights Movement. John Lewis, Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, and others that were college students that were involved in the battle. The question today is, where are the students? Where are the young people engaged in the struggle for their own future? I remember just 7 months ago that we engaged in a prolonged struggle around the indictments of the 4 police under Amadou Diallo. And we were able to organize a civil disobedience campaign unlike any that has been seen in recent history. 13 consecutive days. 1,200 people went to jail. Very rich, very poor, black, white, Jew, Gentile, militant, Toms, everybody. There was only one thing absent. A lot of the young brothers and sisters that are engaged by the music industry, that rap the most militant lyrics, that are racially profiled more than anybody. When it was time for action, they were absent. I asked some of my bad rappers, Where are you on the front line? Now, I'm not asking that out of context. Sammy Davis Jr., who we thought was moderate, marched with Dr. King. Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte raised the money. Many of the Panther Party members could tell you that many of the blacks, Oscar Brown Jr. and others, raised the money for them. Today, we have blacker language in our arts, but they're not physically involved in the movement of their generation. We've been tricked into talking bad, cussing out our women on CDs. But when people shoot you down, we can't find you. Well, Reverend, I'm waiting on the revolution. Revolutions don't just come. You work on revolutions. I grew up right down the block at Washington Temple, and a lot of us remind me of some of those there. They wait on the Lord. You wait on the revolution. The Lord and the revolution didn't tell you to wait. They told you to work until I get there and make it happen. Nowhere in the Bible told you to wait and do no work. And no revolution just dropped out the sky. But we are in a generation that I challenge that must become involved, even if it's not my way. You must be involved some way. When I was in Brooklyn College, when I went to Tilden High School, the debate was what we were members of. I was in Breadbasket. My friend was in the Black Panthers. Another friend in something else, Brother Earl Pinto here. We grew up together. He was in the church. Today, you don't argue about what you in, you argue if you in. Because most of us are not involved in anything. And most of us are not a member of anything. But we're expert critics of everybody else that is involved. You know, I like boxing, and I go to a lot of boxing matches. But one thing I learned, there's a difference between those dressing room champions and those champions in the ring. You know, you catch them in interviews in the dressing room, they're sitting there with their robe, they're talking bad. I'm gonna knock them out, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. Soon as he get in the ring, all of that's gone. And that's what I'm saying, many of us are dressing room champions. I don't like this about Jesse Jackson. I got to ask this question about Al Sharpton. I don't trust this about Farrakhan. Well, why don't you get in the ring and take a couple of blows and let's see how much questions you got to ask. In this time, it's not like you don't have issues. Right now, you have a man running for president. Will be announced in the next week or so, Pat Buchanan, who says on the record that Hitler was not a threat to America. And that he doesn't understand why, after 6 million people were fried, they ended World War II. Right now, in your generation, in the big black generation, Pat Buchanan is running for president. That's not bad enough. The state that executes more people than any state in these United States, Texas, their governor, George M. Bush, is running for president. You don't have to go back to the 60s. Right now, in your time, black man in Jasper, Texas, dragged down the street, past his mama's house, his head found a mile from his torso. And you sitting up talking about the good old days like those things don't happen in your generation. Every other day a police incident. In your generation, we built in the 70s a black media network. And out of that network, elected black mayors like Harold Washington in Chicago and David Dinkins in New York. In your generation, with the Telecommunications Act of '96, documented by John Flatteau right here in this school, we're losing radio stations. And if it keeps going in the present trend, you will not have black radio. and conglomerates are merging every day, and you will have 3 or 4 people in charge of communications in this country, and you will not have the ability to get out a message because they will all be controlled by mega giants, and your generation is not moving forward to stop that. We started in National Action Network last year what we call the Madison Avenue Initiative, because we caught a memo circulating saying don't buy ads on Black and Latino radio. You don't want suspects, you want prospects. And what that does, once they dry up the advertising dollar, they go out of business and can buy those stations cheap. We fought to open up the airwaves. They're about to close them down, but we're too busy styling and profiling and trying to look black while they're taking away the ground from under our feet. Today, we are in an environment where a third of our young black men are on parole, probation, or in jail. And the prison industrial complex is booming. The new big housing thing in every city is to build a new jail. They wire jails and can't wire schools. Jails on the internet, and we can't get new books in public schools, in public junior high school. There are many things you could fight if you wanted to stand up and fight. There are many areas that some of us are dealing with, and areas that we're not, that you could organize if you had the will to organize. But we also have been divided. We've been told that we're not one people. We're different. And we think that that is true. So we say, I'm smarter than you, I'm from Alabama. I know business better than you, I'm from Georgia. Or I'm more clear than you, I'm from Jamaica. Or I got more royalty than you, I'm from Haiti. The fact of the matter is, our forefathers didn't make a reservation to go to any of those places. To separate based on where you come from shows real ignorance. If I were to take you out of this school right now and kidnap you and your family and put you in my house and put your children in the living room, put you in my bedroom, put your wife in the bathroom, in 2 weeks if they came out saying, I'm a bathroom Negro, I'm a bedroom Negro, I'm a living room Negro, they would be silly. They all kidnapped Negroes in my house. And that's what you sound like to me. Talking about I'm from Haiti, I'm from Jamaica, I'm from Georgia, you from Africa. They dropped you off in Georgia. And now that we find ourselves here in the same boat, we need to find out together how we're going to deal with our situation. But there is no inherent difference in our circumstance. That's how we got here in the first place. And again, go back to history. Right here in Brooklyn, we didn't have that battle 20, 30 years ago. Shirley Chisholm was Caribbean, was the congresswoman here. There was no difference then. Walter Stewart, we had pioneers. We struggled together. Howard Beach, a young brother from Trinidad, Michael Griffith, who we fought for, all the way to Abner from Haiti. So now you come with your intellectualism, with your brilliant, smart idea that you can analyze something that had been resolved before you got on the scene. I'm telling you that the challenge is for you to pick up the tradition of struggle and deal with the issues in your day. Now, another point on that is that we must not try and act as if our insecurity is militant. Many of us don't fight and say, I'm not in that. I'm not going to deal with the system. I'm not going to do this, that, or other, because you're afraid to compete. The reason why I engage in the criminal justice system fights and other fights is I don't believe they're smarter than we are. And we have the numbers in this city that we can do whatever we want to do if we organize. Lastly, it takes a personal commitment. You need to decide early in life what you're on the planet for. You should ask yourself every day, what am I doing here? What do I want to achieve in life? Life is too difficult to go through all of this without a goal in mind and without a purpose in mind. You can't ever arrive if you don't have a destination. You got to know where you're going. You got to figure out what it's going to take to get there. And you have to believe in yourself if nobody else believes in you. If we were to leave this school right now and say we're going from here to Fulton Nostrand, we would know in 15 or 20 minutes whether we arrived. But if we were to leave this school and say we're just going to hang out, in 2 hours we couldn't get angry that we didn't get anywhere because we wasn't headed nowhere. And most of us don't get anywhere because we got nowhere in mind. You got to decide early where you're going and be determined to get there no matter what. Let me say this along those lines. I grew up right here in the Albany Projects. First 10 years of my life, my father was a successful businessman. Moved the family to Hollis, Queens. In them days, we thought Hollis was the suburbs. He bought a new Cadillac every year, real successful. But one day they broke up. I ended up back in Brooklyn. Grew up on welfare in the Albany Projects. In the days that I grew up, they used to make us stand in line to get the welfare cheese and the peanut butter in the tin jars. But I remember, Brother Jackson, that every day we'd have to go, my mother would always tell me that life is not about where you come from. Life is about where you're going. And doesn't matter what others think of you, it matters what you think of yourself. I remember I had a teacher at Somers Junior High School named Miss Barton, who told me one day she wanted me to stay after class. And I stayed, and she jumped all over me. She said, "You keep putting on the heading of your schoolwork, Reverend Al Sharpton. Who do you think you are?" I said, "Well, Miss Barton, I'm a preacher. Boy, preacher Washington Temple. I don't care who you think you are. You write your name like the other students. Don't you know you should be going, when you graduate from here, to the vocational school, get you a job that you can live up to and quit having all these dreams." But I refused to let Miss Barton define for me who I was and define for me what I would be. And I thank God I lived long enough. I saw Miss Barton last year. And Miss Barton admitted to me in 1997 she voted for me to be the mayor of New York City. Don't ever let nobody tell you what you could be. Don't let anyone else define for you what you could be. If people can define you, they can confine you. Deal with your own image of yourself and be that no matter what. Great people in history are people that beat the odds and defined for themselves who they were going to be. I remember when I ran for mayor, people laughed. They had no money, said I had baggage. I said, every politician got baggage. Just some got enough money to have sky caps carry their bags. I got to carry my own. But I kept running and I kept talking about the issues that concerned people. On primary night, they wasn't laughing no more because they understood that if you believe in yourself, others will believe in you. But if you don't believe in yourself, can't nobody make you be what you don't see for yourself. But don't only make it an individual thing. Have a broader dream on how you're going to help change the world in which you live. All can't be on the front page of papers. We all can't lead great marches, but everybody can do something that will contribute to the whole. Life has no meaning if all you do in life is for yourself. If all you do in life is for yourself, when your life is over, it won't matter to nobody but yourself. I can tell you that the hardest job of a black preacher is to preach the funeral of an insignificant Negro. That's a hard job. They roll the body down the aisle. Family sitting there crying and carrying on. And we're supposed to get up and hallucinate for you a life you never lived. Buy you a nice car, who cares? Soon as you die, we'll ride all over Brooklyn in your car. Get you a nice crib, who cares? Do something a little above yourself so that your life will have meaning more than just your own self-aggrandizement. So my challenge is deal with the issues of the day. Mobilize, organize. If you can't organize, then join an organization. But don't just sit by and watch the world go by. When you can get involved and help to shape the world and get a dream and make your dream come true and measure your greatness by how far you can go and then help others at the same time. I leave you the story of a great academician preacher told me named Dr. Sam Proctor. He said, you know, Al, I went to speak at a school in South Carolina. I got to the school a little early in the afternoon, so I decided that I would walk around the campus to see what campus life was all about. As I began walking around that afternoon, I ran up on a scene that kind of stunned me. I saw a young man over 7 feet tall walking around hugged up with a young lady barely 4 feet tall. He said, as hard as I tried, I couldn't stop staring at this scene. Finally, I pulled myself away and went back to my room, and soon the president of college came to take me to dinner. As soon as we sat down, I couldn't wait to ask him. I said, Mr. President, I got to ask you something. I saw something this afternoon that bothered me. I saw a giant of a young man walking around all hugged up with a little lady, barely 4 feet tall. He said, the president of college said, wait a minute, before you go any further, I don't want you to misunderstand what you saw. That was not a boyfriend and girlfriend. That was a sister and a brother. In fact, they're twin sisters and brothers. By some freak of nature, he came out a giant, and she came out a midget. But he's the best basketball player in the state. When he graduated high school, 11 or 12 colleges and universities wanted him. But he made one demand. He said, wherever I go, they got to give a scholarship to my little sister. And we were the only college that would fulfill that demand. Said when he came to campus the first day of school, I brought him in my office and I said, young man, everything is straight, papers are signed. He said, but I have to ask you, why did you demand that wherever you went had to give a scholarship to your sister? He said, the young man looked at me and said, Mr. President, you don't understand. Before anyone knew my name, my sister was my cheerleader. Before my name was ever in lights, she used to build my self-esteem. When I used to mess up practice and I was clumsy, she would be my pep talk teacher. And I knew the day would come that she would grow older and they would hurt her feelings, calling her shorty and calling her midget. And I wanted to be there for her like she was there for me. If you really want to be a giant, find somebody a little smaller than you, a little more unfortunate than you. If you really want to be brilliant, go back where you come from. Go back to Brownsville. Go back to Bed-Stuy. Find some child from a broken home and help bring them along with you. Because real giants don't smash midgets. Real giants lift them on their shoulders so we can see the world from the same place. Thank you, and God bless you.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Education and Perspectives. I'm so glad you joined me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week for another exciting segment of Education and Perspectives from Medgar Evers College. Until then, I'm Marge Battle, and be well.
Tune in next week for Cultural Streams with your host, Dr. Delrich Hunter. His guest, artist, Danny Simmons. Medgar Evers College, School of Continuing Education. For information regarding ongoing registration, please call area code 718-270-6400. That number again, 718-270-6400.